So I want to dedicate this talk to Dr. Robert Moore, the Jungian analyst and professor of psychology and religion from Chicago University. He unfortunately died recently in tragic circumstances. He's been very influential in my life. In fact, I think I could say he's been influential in the life of the monasteries that I was associated with, because his work was much appreciated, not just by me. He did work on archetypal psychology, and he wrote 4 books called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Because he was a man, he emphasized the king side of things. He said, I'll leave the work of writing the books on Queen, Warrior, Magician, Lover to a woman. So one of the pieces of work that he did, born out of his cross-cultural studies that were also supported by his students, so it wasn't just a one-man show, was the development of this model of the 7 stages of initiation. He studied across cultures from around the world, looking for commonalities in the way they would mythologize, describe, and express in literature the different stages of initiation human beings go through in order to realize and fulfill their fullest potential and become, you could say, blessings within the society, become a blessing within the culture. And I've used this, incorporated this into my contemplative life, and I believe it's brought some clarity of seeing to me, and hopefully it's easy enough to learn. It can help bring some clarity of seeing to others as well. So the first stage of initiation then is the stage of restlessness, of feeling that there is something missing, a missing piece in my life, something that needs to be added, something that needs to be done. I've got to break out of this relationship, break out of my job, break out of this habitual way of living. I have to renew myself in some way. I'm not quite sure how to renew myself, but I have a strong instinctual sense that some process of renewal is required. I'm not sure how to go about it, but I know something needs to be done, and acting out can occur. It happened to me in my life. I think after about 5 or 6 years in the monastery, I started to behave erratically. I started to speak out of turn, say inappropriate things, became difficult to be around. I was like basically putting it out there that something's wrong, I'm not happy, and I can't tolerate this anymore. And I really didn't know what it was. I couldn't stop myself from doing it, and it was quite discomforting for others as well as me. And fortunately, the abbot at the time understood that something needed to be done, and he basically threw me out of the monastery and said, don't come back until you're ready. And being unable to carry money or food, that was quite an intimidating challenge, but it became an initiation. Fundamentally, had to leave home and go on pilgrimage, living in faith, and that was the initiation I needed to undergo that that journeying, that searching. And I did set off, and I did journey and search on my own terms, in a kind of boundless, unfettered way for as long as I wanted. And I was away for months and months, walking through Italy and France and other places, sleeping outside, and finding that the universe was responsive and supportive to me. I mean, that was a tremendous discovery in and of itself, that I could travel without money, without credit cards, without a safety net. And in putting myself out there and trusting myself into the universe would respond by ensuring that my needs were in fact met in ways I could never have anticipated. So that was a magical and amazing experience. So that was my first stage of initiation, in a sense, that sense of something needs to be done. And then the second stage of initiation is the literal, concrete setting off on the journey. It's where Oedipus gets on the boat and heads off to look for the golden fleece. So that second stage then is going to look for that spiritual community, or that spiritual teacher, or the therapist, or the relationship, or the move in job, or the move to a different country. You know, it's all coming from a similar motivation, and looking for an experience of complete renewal, a complete refresh. the more consciously we can enter into this second stage of the initiation, the more likely it is it's going to have a positive outcome. You recognize that this isn't pathology that we're experiencing. It's not necessarily even a middle-age crisis or any sort of a crisis, although it may appear as a crisis, but more often than not, it's a necessary stage in our development that we have to entrust ourselves to and not fight. It's probably going to feel as if we're facing uncertainty, we're facing the unknown, we're not sure what's going to happen, where we're heading, what we're going to find, whether we're going to be supported, whether it's going to be okay. All of these things come to meet us. I mean, for me, leaving the monasteries without money, without food, gave rise to a tremendous feeling of insecurity. The first thing I did was ring my mother and get her to buy me sleeping bags and equipment and all the gear, you know, blah blah blah, because you know, this is what the mind does. It sort of goes into a state of panic when faced with the invitation, and more than invitation, in essence requirement, to step outside the boundaries of the familiar walls. But if we're going to become fully alive, then there's going to be a point where we have to do that. So anyway, that stage of initiation sends us off on the search, and then the third stage of initiation is finding that therapist, finding that person, finding that community that seems to embody, seems to be in possession of this missing piece and that we're in search of. And if it is going to be a deep initiation, it probably is going to be related to something that carries transformational force. It's going to be a shaman. It's going to be a journey to the Peruvian rainforests to take ayahuasca. Not that I'm necessarily recommending that, although I'm not saying don't do it, but you know, it's one of the things people do. In my case, it was heading off to the monasteries, looking for human beings that were embodying something outside of my ken, outside of my knowing. It could be a therapist. It could be some sort of transformational group work. It could be starting to do salsa dancing, something that takes us out of our comfort zone and puts us into unfamiliar territory. In my case, it was seeking the question of transcending birth and death itself. So it turned out that it went all the way up to, you know, monastic spiritual community, and that's where I found the thing that you know, had the impact that made sense to me. And yeah, it was I didn't have it and they had it, and this is third stage initiation. It's like, finally I've recognized I can identify, I just hit the microphone, I've recognized I can identify the thing I'm looking for. They have it, I don't have it, I'm going to do this. Third stage initiation. Fourth stage initiation then is when things start to get interesting. It's like, okay, they had it, now fourth stage initiation, now I'm seeing it. I'm experiencing this spiritual numinosity now. It's not just them that are apparently numinous and I'm not. I'm experiencing it myself now. I'm one of them. I got it. I got what I'm looking for. This is it. This is the real thing. This is the real deal. I can feel my mind is awakening, is brightening. And in fact, that is what happened in the monasteries as a consequence of the restraint, the renunciation, the work, getting up early and meditating a lot and eating one meal a day and living celibate life. Then my mind started to become luminous. I didn't learn about luminosity of mind at the Edinburgh Academy when I was sitting there writing out my French verbs or wrote geography or wrote history or playing rugby. I didn't really learn about luminosity of mind. Began to learn about luminosity of mind unconsciously when I studied photography, but it's only when I went into the monasteries and received initiation, received this fourth stage initiation, that I began to see mind has properties that no one had ever educated me about, no one ever told me about, no one had ever pointed out, no one had ever even mentioned. So it was kind of amazing to see that my mind was, you could say it was like a sunrise. Sunrise is really a very good image for it. This gradual sunrise. My God, the sun is rising. Before the sun was over the horizon, could maybe sense some warmth, some glow coming over the horizon, but it certainly hadn't risen yet. So when the sun starts to rise, this is when things start to get interesting and start to get more tricky. I mean, I've been through it. Because this fourth stage of initiation, when you start to have the experience that you saw in your teacher or you saw in your community, you think, well, I've got it now. I'm enlightened. I'm awake. It's called the stage of unconscious incompetence, because it tends to be an overestimation of one's realization and an underestimation of how much work remains to be done. And I fell for that. I think our whole community probably fell for that, but I certainly can say with confidence that I fell for it. I knew I'd fallen for it. I said to people at the time, there's something not quite right about this. I was lit up like a Christmas tree. You know, I could sense that I was lit up like a Christmas tree in a dark room. Sometimes I'd be in a public space and I could tell I was like this shiny Christmas tree covered in lights, and no one else had any lights on. And it sort of felt kind of amazing, but at the same time I knew it wasn't quite right. But there's nothing I could do about it. Absolutely nothing. Even though I knew it wasn't right, I couldn't take the next step. I couldn't make the next step as a conscious choice. I just had to wait. And sure enough, fifth stage initiation came along. Part of the initiation, I'm not willing to reveal the entire story here, but part of the initiation that was fifth stage had to do with experience of falling in love with a nun and all the ramifications of that, and other things that happened to other people in the monastery at the same time. It was like a big mess. And there's a saying, where there is a hole, the rhinoceros horn will enter. So where there is this overconfident grandiosity, which is basically what was occurring, and I'm not pathologizing that as a negative, I'm saying it's a necessary stage, but where that occurs, eventually the next stage of initiation will occur. The shadow will be revealed. If we don't learn to work with the unconscious shadow, then the shadow will present itself into our lives in and of itself, and that's what occurred. In fact, it very much follows the myth of Camelot. In the myth of Camelot, the white knight, Lancelot, the good knight, the incorruptible knight, the glory of the round table, the sidekick of the king, he's the one that got the sexual turn on for the queen with Guinevere. And that crossing of the boundaries and that idealistic dismissal of the instinctual realm eventually led to the breaking up of the round table, and in many ways that's what occurred for me. I hadn't fully integrated my instinctual feelings, my sexuality and all the rest of it, and it blew up as the next stage initiation, fifth stage, otherwise known as the depressive position, because a lot of the shine comes off, the charisma goes, the confidence, the overconfidence goes, and there's much more of a sober appreciation actually of how difficult this is going to be, just because I have experienced or had experienced at the time still mind, luminous mind, expanded mind, blissful mind, intuitively intelligent mind, sense of divinity, spiritual experiences up the wazoo that I don't even go into. Even though all of that had occurred, it was by no means the end of the process. Felt like it was the end at the time, perhaps, although I suspected it wasn't. And I was right. Fifth stage initiation occurred, the rhinoceros horn entered, from behind, and life blew up again. So yeah, I did enter into quite a deep eclipse of the sun. All the luminosity of mind really went. It was just like dark time, really dark time. Spent a lot of time paralyzed, basically, you know, on my back, hiding under my robes. We used to sleep under my robes. So I mean, yes, it was hard, but the really good thing about it was it felt really real. In some sense, there was this tremendous sense of relief, like finally I've landed on the real deal, you know. I'm full flat in my face into the mud of my unconscious, and I've surrendered to it. I've found it, I've surrendered to it, I'm integrating it. I'm going to live with this now. I'm not going to be a flying boy anymore that is flying above, hovering above in an inflated luminous space above that which I've failed to and I've been unable up to this point to accept into my life. So it was like, yeah, this is a real wound, but finally I'm living with it and no longer running. So I kind of relished the experience of this downtime, of this time of ashes, and I knew it was necessary. I knew it was good. I had enough, you could say, sense of the rightness of it and the goodness of it to keep practicing. And I was living alone pretty much in a monastery in Italy, and I used to do a lot of long meditations from about 7 in the evening through till midnight, and I just did that again and again, day and night, day and night. I knew that even although there had been this eclipse of the lightness and brightness of my mind, I knew that this was a necessary process to go through, a process of descent. And I instinctively knew that if I could get through this, then I would come out the other side. I would make a renewed connection with the potential I knew was within me, and that connection would this time be more mature and more sustainable. And so it was to be, but it took many years. So this is the 5th stage initiation. So fourth stage initiation is quite dangerous, not just for the person who believes that they are the shaman, they are the teacher, they are the realized one, because, you know, they're imbued with sort of a charismatic confidence that can be inspiring to others, and others can project onto them that, yeah, you're the one, blah, blah, blah. So you can get this, not a virtuous cycle, but a slightly unvirtuous cycle in a sense, where you get an unstable system because it is a charismatic position. 4th stage initiation has a characteristic of charisma. Charisma is very magnetizing, can be very magnetic, and for people who are looking for that kind of super confident spiritual type of person, they can fall for it and place them on a pedestal, and that person's more often than not quite happy to be on that pedestal. And this is a situation that is unstable and will eventually explode. I've got a nose for it now. I've seen it in other communities, and you can usually see the train coming down the track quite early on. And sure enough, you can predict that within a year or two, things are going to turn sour, and more often than not, you hear news coming down the pipeline that, yep, there's a mess happening. And there is a lot of this going on. There is a lot of 3rd stage initiation happening, and so it's important to begin to develop a nose for it and to understand that this phenomenon exists. It's to be expected, especially, you know, when I see pictures of myself and others, for example, in the monasteries. We were young, we were in our 20s, we were in our 30s. You look at the pictures and think, my God, we were so young. How could we not have had many stages to go through and have these difficult lessons to go through? It's no wonder these things occurred. So, ironically and surprisingly perhaps, 5th stage initiation has less shine, is not quite so overly confident, it's a bit more hesitant, it's a little less like, I'm it, I know it, and this is the way it is. It's got a different tone to it, and it doesn't attract those who are seeking the sensational. It's less sensational, but is more mature. Let's put it that way. fourth stage initiation can be extremely sensational, and it can attract those that are seeking that sensation, and it can look absolutely kind of amazing. Our community at that time was amazing. I literally thought we were going to take over the world, because we had all these amazing monks, amazing nuns, 40, 50 novices. We'd have these Sangha meetings, and there'd be hundreds of lay people and inspiring speeches, and everyone was like shiny and radiant and wise. It's just like, how can this not take over the world? You know, this is the truth. This is wisdom. This is spiritual transformation. How can this not take over the world? And it didn't. And the community moved on to fifth stage initiation. It is superficially a less inspiring place to be, but it's probably more mature, more realistically presenting itself now. Or certainly individuals that have come through it are. I would say I'm more mature than I was then. I've perhaps got less of the charisma that I had then, but more depth, more maturity. So sixth stage initiation, what's that? It carries on. We're not at the end yet. Sixth stage initiation actually is the stage that is sometimes called conscious competence. So we've gone from unconscious incompetence, fourth stage initiation, to conscious incompetence, fifth stage initiation, otherwise known as the depressive position, sixth stage initiation, conscious competence. So actually what starts to happen is the experience of integration with the current of your life force begins to occur, begin to become more and more naturally into alignment with it. You feel body and mind beginning to unify, and the singularity of samadhi beginning to take hold. And there's a recognition, subliminal recognition, that actually this awakening now is really taking root. It's more sober than fourth stage initiation, but it's a realistic appraisal based on a more mature sense of how it all goes, how it all works. As the years roll by, as we grow older, we tend to accumulate more depth. And because there's a seeing of that. It's referenced from the Theravada, but one of the things that binds us to degrees of unenlightenment is conceit, and conceit is one of the last fetters to go. So this is the area where the part of mind that has self-referencing inclination to be pleased with how things are going, and to know that actually I'm coming out of the tunnel here into the light, and I'm happy about it. That movement of mind, you know, is still existent. It's one of the last fetters to go. So all of that's being worked through at this stage of conscious competence. Everything starts to flow. Your body, speech and mind start to become synchronized, and the Dhamma makes sense. Buddha Dhamma makes sense. To translate that for those who haven't heard the other talks, the interior sense of me-ness begins to become appropriately orientated to the exterior presence of otherness, others, other things, and the me thing connect and become a unified whole. So sixth stage initiation then is the stage that is called unconscious competence. It's where you begin to forget yourself. You're so in the flow, you're so fulfilled, you're so completed by the experience of the totality of our being. We're so completed by it, and it's so natural, it's so self-evident, it's so unremarkable. It is remarkable, but it's no more remarkable than the universe is remarkable. The universe is remarkable, but it's unremarkable in that it just is. So it's remarkably unremarkable. Or it's unremarkably remarkable. I don't quite know how to say it. But because it's all-consuming, the sense of it happening to me and that defining me in some way in relation to everything else doesn't make any sense anymore. It just is what it is. Unconscious incompetence, you basically forget that there is enlightenment happening to you. It's like, how could it be otherwise? It's just the way it should be. This is natural for all beings, for all things. And if people aren't experiencing it, then I want to help them. And this is 7th stage initiation. The final stage of initiation is reaching the point where you begin to look for means of enabling awakening to happen within the culture. So it can be the creation of institutions or teaching practices or some sort of service. It's service orientated, whatever way you want to put it. I don't quite know how it's appearing in my life. I mean, I think maybe this offering of the website is me trying to sort of work in this area. But it's a deep desire to ensure that others don't miss out on that which is so obvious, that which brings about an experience of completion. The missing of this opportunity is just a disaster for human beings and for society, and it's the massive elephant in the room. Once you see it, it's like being in open space and breathing and seeing other people somehow desperately looking for air to breathe, when in fact all they need to do is breathe in and it's there. When they're suffocating and dying in a horrible experience of depletion and deprivation, because the awakened state is golden. It is a golden way of being. It's a golden life. And it has to do with survival. I've just heard a spiritual teacher saying, oh, well, one reason we don't go in, develop this inward sensitivity is because the external senses have to do with survival. Yes, they do. They kick in. But as the external senses begin to register the situation that appears to us through the external senses, you recognize Jesus Christ. You know, there's a big universe out there. I'm on a small planet. I've got this fleshy body, and I'm in trouble. Not going to survive this. Certainly not going to survive it for more than 100 years, 120 if I'm a freak. That's about it. So the interior journey is also about survival. It's about connecting with that which is eternal. Once you begin to connect with the eternal dimension, then the temporal dimension is what it is. Of course, you're determined and interested in enabling its survival for as long as possible, but you're preparing for the next step. So you're aware of how it's contextualized. If you're not aware of how it's contextualized, then you haven't utilized all of your faculties. So this is the enabling of all of our faculties. So this 7 stages of initiation is very interesting because it's a pattern you're going to hopefully be able to see in your own life. You'll certainly see it in the lives of others, and it's very helpful certainly to be aware of this 4th, 5th stage around relationships you may have with spiritual communities and spiritual teachers. You want to ask yourself, what's really going on here? This person is highly impressive, highly confident, but is this 4th stage, or is this more towards real integration? Because 4th stage, despite its charisma, despite its magnetism, despite its super confidence, it's going to be an initiation into pain, because 5th stage initiation is fundamentally an initiation into unconscious pain that is not yet, that's been ignored. And the more unconscious it is, the more shocking the initiation will have to be. Because I had cultivated a lot of brightness, then the darkness had to thump me like a sledgehammer. It was a bull horn driving through me in order to wake me up. Because it's very hard to knock a cocky person off their throne. It's very hard to knock me down off my throne. So it took a blast, an atomic blast. It doesn't necessarily have to be that disruptive. It can be a gentler process that's incumbent on often the environment, the community, and if you're alerted to what's going on, and I'm giving you the news now, no one told me this at the time, if you're alerted to what's going on, you can assess, test your intuitive waters. Are you sure you're being real, true to yourself? Are you sure you're being honest about what's in your unconscious, your unconscious pain? Are you really working with it, or are you on a bypass route? because fourth stage initiation will be very much about spiritual bypassing. You're going to bypass that which is difficult, bypass that which is shitty, and just go straight for the light. You just want the light. I don't want all this. Don't have to work through, laying a proper foundation, which is, getting into the mud and the wet. And if you've seen these programs where they build buildings, it's often a nightmare at the beginning. It's all slipping around in wet mud and pouring wet concrete and digging holes and spending hundreds of thousands of pounds, and you just end up with, at the end, just a slab of concrete in a muddy field. That's what laying the foundation's like. It's not the glamorous bit, but if you build the building without a proper foundation, you don't need me to spell it out. So this is why it's a useful model. This is all I have to say on it at this moment in time, but I hope you find this a interesting and useful reflection.